There is a particular kind of tiredness that does not want silence. It wants a voice it already knows, a town it has already visited, a mystery whose ending it has already learned by heart. For a great many people, that town is Gravity Falls, and the falling asleep begins before the eyes even close. You know the shape of the theme before it plays. You know Grunkle Stan will grumble, and Mabel will sing to herself, and Dipper will read aloud from a book, bound in a hand you have long stopped fearing. Think about what that means. The half-awake mind is not looking for surprise. It is looking for a room it can lie down in, and a show watched enough times becomes exactly that, a set of familiar walls that hold their shape while you let go of holding your own. Tonight is about the room behind that room. Underneath the summer colors and the pratfalls, Gravity Falls was built on darker bones, and those bones are what we settle into now, slowly, the way you might notice the load-bearing beams of a house you have slept in for years. Welcome to Pine Hat. Before anything else, get comfortable. Lower the light until the screen is the warmest thing near you. Let the pillow take the weight of your head, and let your shoulders come down from wherever the day left them. There is nothing here you need to keep up with, no thread you must hold to the end. The words will keep moving whether you follow them or drift, and if you surface an hour from now, the voice will still be here, still talking quietly about a place you already know. You do not have to stay awake for any of it. That is rather the point. Let yourself begin to sink, and we will walk through the dark side of Gravity Falls together, gently, one small strangeness at a time. There is a sentence Alex Hirsch has repeated often enough that it has hardened into a kind of origin myth, and it is worth sitting with because of how strange it is. He has summarized the entire formula of Gravity Falls as The Simpsons plus Twin Peaks plus making fun of his sister. Read that again slowly. One half of the equation is the most commercially safe animated comedy in television history, a show that runs on warmth and yellow skin and the reliable rhythm of a family that never really changes. The other half is David Lynch. And the third element, the joke about his sister, is the thing that keeps the whole apparatus disguised as harmless. That is the trick this video is going to examine. Not the scares, not the moment a monster appears and the music stabs. Something quieter and more unsettling. The way a children's cartoon on the Disney Channel was built, from the pitch document forward, out of the bones of adult horror. Consider what it means to name Twin Peaks as a core influence for a show aimed at children. Twin Peaks is a story about a dead girl, about a town whose friendly surface hides incest and possession, and a darkness that has no bottom. It is the definitional text for the idea that the American small town is a mask. When Hirsch went to pitch Gravity Falls to Disney, he did not hide this. He described the series, in effect, as a Twin Peaks meets The Simpsons type of show. Think about the room that pitch had to survive. He was standing in front of a network built on brand safety, and he was pairing a network-friendly comedy engine with an adult mystery and horror show, and he was asking them to buy both at once. The comedy was the passport, the horror was the cargo, and the influences did not stop at those two poles. Hirsch has elsewhere described the series as part Simpsons, part X-Files, and part Twin Peaks, folding in the great television text of paranoia and government conspiracy. The X-Files is the one about the hidden file, the redacted document, the sense that the institutions meant to protect you are the ones keeping the secret. That undercurrent, the conspiracy and mystery running beneath the jokes, is one of the three legs the whole thing stands on. A town full of secrets, a journal full of redactions, an authority that cannot be trusted. Those are not children's television instincts. Those are the instincts of the programs a certain kind of adult watched alone late in the 1990s. Hirsch has been candid that this darkness was not a fixed level, but a rising one. In an interview, when he was told that his show was darker than most kids' shows, he did not deny it. Instead, he described the trajectory. The conspiracy element, the X-Files quality, the spookiness, all of it, he said, in effect, gets a stronger highlight in Season 2 than it did in Season 1. Alongside that came more menacing villains and higher stakes, so the series did not smuggle its horror in once and rest. It escalated. The mask slipped further as the series went on, deliberately, with the creator's hand steady on the dial. A viewer who felt Season 1 was a comedy with strange edges was being prepared, without quite knowing it, for a Season 2 that would let the strange edges become the center. There is a piece of casting that turns all of this from claim into proof, and it is the kind of detail that rewards a person who knows where to look. Twin Peaks starred Kyle MacLachlan, whose face is inseparable from the idea of the outsider walking into a town that is not what it seems. In the Gravity Falls series finale, MacLachlan reportedly returns in a small voice role that is easy to miss. A small part, easy to miss. But the man who was the eyes of Twin Peaks is now standing, in voice, inside the children's cartoon that Twin Peaks helped create. It is a direct cast link between the kids' show and its adult horror and mystery ancestor. And it is the sort of gesture a creator makes when he wants the reader to know exactly what he was doing. A signature, hidden in a bus. If the influences tell you what the series was made of, the network's own notes tell you something even funnier and more revealing about how it survived. For the show's 10th anniversary in the year 2022, Hirsch did something unusual. He publicly released the real notes that Disney Channel's Standards and Practices Department had sent him during production, and he reportedly had another performer read the department's side aloud. What those notes reveal is the strange geometry of what a network chooses to fear. You might expect the objections to be about the horror, about the cosmic dread, the demons, the sense of a world coming apart. They were not. The objections were about words. Standards and Practices flagged the word Lucifer, which appeared in a line describing an object scrimshawed from the tusks of Lucifer himself. The concern was religious complaint, the worry that naming the devil would draw letters. Hirsch defended the word as spooky and Halloween-like, and the defense is telling because it frames the horror as decoration, as seasonal fun, precisely the register that lets darkness pass. The department also objected to the phrase hoo-ha, flagged as slang for female anatomy, and to a t-shirt that read chub pup, flagged as carrying a sexual connotation even though it merely depicted a fat dog. Sit with the picture that emerges. A show whose deepest subject was mind control and cosmic horror was being reviewed, line by line, for innuendo. The gatekeepers were watching for a rude word on a dog's shirt, while an allegory about possession walked past them untouched. That is not a failure of the system exactly. It is the system doing what it was built to do, guarding the surface, and it is the reason a show like this one could exist at all. Hirsch, for his part, seemed to enjoy playing at the edge of what the surface would allow, and there is one moment where the play tips into something genuinely dark. In 2015, he took part in a Reddit question and answer session, but he did not answer as himself. He answered in character as Bill Cipher, the series' central figure of malevolence. When a user asked about long-term plans, the reply that came back reportedly gestured toward bringing back MKUltra. That is the real name of the real CIA program, the mid-century American effort to control the human mind through drugs and coercion and experiment. A children's entertainer speaking through his villain, reaching for the single most notorious mind control operation in his own country's history, and offering it as a punchline. The joke works because the villain of Gravity Falls is, in some readable sense, exactly that, an agent of invasion who wants inside your head. The reference carries weight. Hirsch is telling you what the character means, wearing a mask of the character to say it. Underneath all of this, though, is something warmer than the catalog of horror influences might suggest, and it matters for understanding why the darkness never curdles into cruelty. Hirsch has said that his goal in making it was to create something his own 12-year-old self would have loved. He wanted to give children the thing he felt was missing, and never to frighten them for its own sake. He has criticized contemporary children's programming for lacking supernatural content made with love, the way the shows of the 1980s and 90s had it. Notice the phrase, made with love. The horror in his framing is an act of respect toward the child, a refusal to condescend, a belief that a young viewer can hold real wonder and real dread and be trusted with both. And the models he reaches for when he describes the feeling he wanted are not horror films at all. He has cited The Goonies and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the great blockbusters of 1980s childhood, as influences on how it blends believable wonder and magic with grounded, character-driven emotional stakes. That is the other half of the disguise, and maybe the more important half. Twin Peaks gives the show its rot beneath the surface. The X-Files gives it its paranoia. But Spielberg and the era of the suburban adventure give it its heart. The sense that magic is something children discover together, on bikes, in summer, in a real place with real feelings at stake. The cosmic horror is only frightening because the friendship is real. The abuse allegory only lands because the family bond it threatens has been drawn with care. So this is the frame we will carry through everything that follows. Gravity Falls was always more than a comedy. It was a horror project, or a conspiracy project, an allegory about the mind and the family and the things that try to invade both. And it was assembled by a man who told everyone as much, in the pitch, in the interviews, in the casting, in a joke about a CIA program spoken through a demon. The Disney comedy was the shell. What we are going to do across the chapters ahead is look calmly at what the shell was carrying and understand it not as a series of scares, but as a single, deliberate, loving act of smuggling. There is a version of Bill Cipher that the internet remembers, and it is mostly a joke. A yellow triangle with one eye and a top hat, cracking wise, dealing in chaos as if chaos were a stand-up routine. That version is real, and it is also a costume. What the cartoon is doing underneath the costume is something colder, and the first place you can see it clearly is the episode called Dreamscaperers, the 19th episode of the first season, the one that gives Bill his first full appearance in the series. Before this, he is a rumor. Here he arrives, and the manner of his arrival tells you almost everything about how he works. Consider how he is summoned, because the how matters more than the fact of it. Bill does not force his way into the story, he is invited. Gideon, having been physically driven out of the mystery shack by Stan with a broom, does not respond by escalating in the ordinary way with a bigger scheme or a louder threat. He performs a ritual instead, reaching past the human conflict entirely to call up something that has been waiting to be called. As a piece of writing, the move is ruthless. The villain the audience has been following all season, the child psychic with his own ambitions, turns out to be the small fish. The moment Gideon finds himself outmatched, he opens a door, and the thing on the other side of that door is happy to be reached. The trigger for the summoning is precise, and it is worth slowing down on. Gideon summons Bill specifically after overhearing Stan say that the combination to the safe is kept safe because it is locked only inside his own mind. That is Stan's confidence talking. A mind, he assumes, is the one vault nobody can crack. Gideon hears this and answers, in effect, that a mind is not the fortress Stan believes it to be. His own mind, he says, isn't as safe as you might think, Stanford. That line is the hinge of the whole episode. The premise the story wants to overturn is the oldest comfort a person has, the belief that the inside of your own head belongs to you and to no one else. Bill exists to prove that belief false, and Gideon is only the messenger who introduces the idea. Now watch the shape of the deal, because Bill's introduction is built as a transaction, and the terms are the point. He agrees to invade Stan's mind on Gideon's behalf. In exchange, he asks for a favor, nothing he will name. An unspecified future favor owed to him to be collected whenever he decides. This is the detail that separates Bill from every other villain the series has produced. A normal antagonist wants a thing you can see. Bill wants an open account. He is content to give you exactly what you ask for today, knowing that the price is a debt with no ceiling and no due date, a claim on you that he holds and you cannot measure. Gideon, wanting his revenge, agrees. Of course he agrees. The whole method depends on the Mark believing he is the one getting the better end. That is the reframe this chapter is built around. Bill is often described as a trickster, and tricksters are fun. But a trickster plays a prank and leaves. What Bill does is closer to grooming a relationship. He arrives as the solution to your problem. He is agreeable. He is useful. He asks for something that feels small in the moment because it has no shape yet, and he lets you sign. The betrayal was there in the contract from the very start, folded up so small that the person signing cannot see it, while the summoning still looks like nothing but help. Everything charming about him is in service of getting the signature. Set against this is the show's other voice, the one that has been trying to warn everybody. Dipper first meets Bill not through the pages of a journal, but face to face, inside Stan's own mind, and only afterward does he turn to the third journal for answers, and the journal does not equivocate. It carries far more than a couple of explicit warnings about him, one stacked right on top of the next. Never summon him. Never let him inside your mind. 2 rules, stated plainly, and by the time Dipper reads them, one of them has already been broken by Gideon, and the other is about to be. There is a quiet horror in warnings that arrive a moment too late, and the episode uses that gap deliberately. The knowledge exists. It is written down. It simply reaches the people who need it after the door is already open. The warning travels through the family before it can do any good. Mabel and Seuss watch Gideon's summoning ritual firsthand from behind a bush, and they race back to warn Dipper about what Bill is about to do to Stan's mind. Picture the ordinariness of that image for a moment. Two people crouched behind shrubbery, watching a child conjure an interdimensional entity and understanding just enough to be frightened. They do not have the journal in front of them. They have their eyes and their instinct that something is deeply wrong. And they carry that instinct back to the one person who can name what they saw. It is a very human relay. The monster operates in the language of contracts and minds and favors. The people opposing it operate in the language of running to tell someone you love that they are in danger. And then the response, which is the part that turns the episode from a warning into a story. Having learned what is happening, Dipper and Mabel and Suze recite an incantation to enter Stan's mind themselves in order to stop Bill from the inside. Hold that decision up against the second warning in the journal, the one that says, never let him inside your mind. The children read a rule about the sanctity of a mind and then choose to violate it. Not Stan's protection, but their own exposure, walking willingly into the same interior space where the danger already is. It is the correct choice, and it is also exactly the kind of choice Bill's whole method is designed to produce. To fight him, you have to enter the arena he controls. The threshold he wants you to cross, you end up crossing yourself for the best of reasons. A note on where this sits, because the placement is part of the meaning. Dreamscaperers aired on the 12th of July, 2013 as the first half of the season 1 finale, followed immediately by Gideon Rises. By most accounts, it was written and directed by a small team that included Alex Hirsch himself. Putting Bill's first full appearance at the very end of the first season was a structural bet. The show spent 19 episodes building a world of small mysteries and one recurring human villain. And then, at the threshold of its finale, it pulled back the curtain to reveal that all of it had been happening in the shadow of something older and patient. Bill does not take over the finale. He introduces himself, collects his open-ended favor, and withdraws. The season ends, and he is still owed something. That restraint is the most unsettling thing about the introduction. A lesser show would have Bill do maximum damage on his debut. This one has him make a deal and leave the bill unpaid, so that his real presence in the series is not what he does in this episode, but what he is now permitted to come back and collect. He has been summoned once. The rule against summoning him has been broken publicly by someone desperate enough to try. The precedent exists. From here on, the question is never whether the triangle is dangerous. The question is who reaches for him next, and what they will convince themselves they are only borrowing. Some horror does not announce itself with monsters. It arrives instead through a handshake. In Sock Opera, the 4th episode of the 2nd season of Gravity Falls, which first aired on the 8th of September, 2014, Dipper Pines makes a deal with Bill Cipher. The terms are small, or they seem small. Dipper wants a hint to unlock the password on the laptop he has been fighting to open, and Bill offers one in exchange for temporary control of Dipper's body. They shake hands, the bargain is sealed in that gesture, and the moment the fingers meet, the boy has signed away the one thing he never imagined he could lose, which is himself. Consider how ordinary the transaction is made to look. A handshake is the most human of agreements, the oldest symbol of consent freely given. The episode uses that symbol precisely because it is trustworthy, and then it turns the trust inside out. Dipper consents to a hint. What Bill takes is a person. The distance between those two things is the whole engine of the scene, and everything that follows lives inside that gap between what was agreed and what was actually surrendered. Fans nicknamed the result Bipper, a small affectionate word for something that is not affectionate at all. Once Bill is inside Dipper's body, the episode does something quietly disturbing. It does not have him commit some grand villainous act right away. Instead, he becomes fascinated with the body itself, and specifically with hurting it. He displays what can only be described as an unhealthy fixation on inflicting pain on the flesh he is wearing. Watch what that means as a piece of storytelling. The body is still Dipper's. The nerves are Dipper's, the bruises will be Dipper's, and yet the thing operating the controls treats all of it as a toy it has no reason to protect. There is a coldness in that which is far more frightening than any threat, because it removes the ordinary logic by which a body keeps itself safe. This is where the chapter earns its lens. It is easy to read the possession as a plot twist, a clever obstacle the twins must overcome before the story moves on. But if you slow the scene down and refuse to look away, what you are actually watching is a violation. Someone else is living inside a child's body without his permission, using it, damaging it, and treating his refusal as irrelevant because the fine print technically covered it. The animators sell this through the way the body carries itself, the wrongness of a familiar face used by an unfamiliar mind. And the show trusts you to feel the discomfort rather than explaining it to you. The voice work is where the wrongness becomes complete. For the series as a whole, Dipper Pines is voiced by Jason Ritter, and Ritter gives him a warmth and an anxious earnestness that the audience has spent an entire season learning to love. In sock opera, that voice is taken away from him. Alex Hirsch, the creator of the series, personally performs the voiceover for the Bill-possessed Dipper. Think about what that swap does to your ear without your quite noticing it. The face is Dipper, the mannerisms are almost Dipper, but the voice belongs to Bill now, and the mismatch is the horror. You're hearing a stranger speak from a body you trust, and some part of the brain registers the intrusion before the conscious mind names it. The choice to have Hirsch step in rather than have Ritter imitate the change is a deliberate one, and it is the single most effective decision in the whole sequence because it makes the theft audible. The harassment of Wendy belongs to this same reading. While in control of Dipper's body, Bill verbally harasses her. In a lesser show, this might be played as a joke. The awkward crush turned briefly monstrous. Here it lands differently because the body doing the harassing is a body Wendy knows and trusts, the body of a friend. Bill is using Dipper's face to violate the safety Wendy feels around that face, and violating Dipper in the same motion. The consent that was broken multiplies outward, and a boy who would never speak to her that way is made to against everything he is, because the thing wearing him has no interest in who he is. There is a detail buried in the animation that rewards the kind of attention a quiet night gives you. During the possession sequence, if you look at the reflection in a mirror, the word cipher is hidden there. It is the sort of thing most viewers will never catch on a first watch. As a piece of craft, it is a signature, the episode whispering the villain's name in a place the villain would look. As a piece of horror, it is something worse. The mirror is where a person checks that they are still themselves, and the episode has planned the intruder's name in exactly that spot, so that even the reflection has been colonized. The face looking back is not reporting the truth anymore. It is worth remembering that Dipper is not gone during all of this. Earlier in the episode, trapped in the mindscape while his body walks around without him, he manages to reach Mabel through a sock puppet version of himself. The puppet frightens her, which is fitting, because there is something genuinely frightening about a person you love speaking to you through an object because the ordinary channel has been stolen. Through that strange little proxy, he warns her about Bill's plan. So the boy is conscious the whole time, aware, locked out of his own hands and voice, watching a stranger drive. That awareness is the quiet cruelty at the center of the episode. This is not a possession where the victim sleeps through it. Dipper is awake for every moment of it and can do almost nothing. The way Mabel wins is worth dwelling on because it completes the body horror logic instead of abandoning it. She does not defeat Bill with magic or with a clever counter deal. She defeats him with the body. Dipper's body has not slept in 24 hours and it is covered in mosquito bites. And Mabel understands that Bill, for all his power, is now bound by ordinary flesh and its ordinary limits. So she runs him ragged. She pushes the exhausted, itching, sleep-starved body until it simply collapses. And when it does, Bill is forced out and Dipper reclaims what was his. The victory is a beautiful inversion of the horror. The very frailty that made the possession so unsettling, the fact that a body can be hurt and worn down, becomes the thing that saves the boy. Bill treated the body as disposable, and the body's own exhaustion evicts him. Behind all of this sits a group of people making careful choices. Sock Opera was written by Alex Hirsch, Cheyenne Takeuchi, and Mark Rizzo, and directed by Matt Brailey and Joe Pitt. It is easy, watching a children's cartoon late at night, to assume its darker beats are accidents or overreaches. They are not. A team decided that the creator himself would voice the stolen body, decided to hide the villain's name in a mirror, decided to make the defeat hinge on the frailty of an unslept and bitten body. Each of those is a deliberate act of construction aimed at making the wrongness felt rather than stated. And that is what raises the scene above a twist. A twist surprises you and is forgotten. What sock opera stages is closer to a study of what it means to lose the sovereignty of your own body, told through a boy who agreed to a hint and woke to find himself a passenger. The handshake is where it begins, and the collapse is where it ends, and everything between those two moments is the show asking you, gently, to take the violation seriously. A different kind of dread wears no monster at all, and Gravity Falls locates it precisely in the middle of its second season, in an episode called Society of the Blind Eye. The discovery begins not with a creature or a cave, but with an absence. Dipper, Mabel, Zeus, and Wendy notice something that should be impossible about a man they have known all summer as the town eccentric. Old Man McGucket, the disheveled figure who shouts warnings and tinkers with junk on the edge of everything, has no memories from before the year 1982. Not blurred memories, not painful ones he prefers to avoid, none. A whole life simply stops at a certain point as if someone had drawn a line across it and erased everything on the far side. That absence is the thread the children pull, and what unravels is not a haunting. It is an institution. What they find is a secret society that has spent years erasing the memories of Gravity Falls citizens, removing every encounter with the supernatural, every glimpse of the weird, from the minds of ordinary people who happen to see too much. Weigh that as a premise. The other frightening things in this town are at least honest about being frightening. They are gnomes or ghosts or shapeshifters. This is different. This is a group of neighbors who decided quietly and collectively that the correct response to fear is to reach into another person's head and take something out. The children test their theory before they act on it, and the test is small and devastating. They show McGucket an entry from the third journal, the passage describing the symbol of the blind eye, and something stirs in him. He recovers a single fragment, a memory of robes and men. That is all, robes and men. It is enough to confirm that his mind was tampered with, and it is little enough to communicate exactly how thorough the tampering was. A man can be reduced, by careful work, to 2 nouns and a feeling of dread. The rest is gone. Filed away somewhere, waiting. Where it waits turns out to be almost absurdly close to the surface of town life. The entrance to the Society's underground headquarters is hidden behind the eye exhibit at the Gravity Falls Museum of History, reached through a fireplace, tucked inside the one building whose entire purpose is supposed to be the preservation of the past. There is a bleak joke buried in that placement, and the episode lets it sit without underlining it. A museum keeps memory for a community. Beneath this one, in a chamber accessed by moving aside the display, a machine does the opposite. The institution devoted to remembering has a basement devoted to forgetting, and the two have coexisted for years without anyone noticing the contradiction. The group arrives in time to watch the work being done. The society is erasing Lazy Susan's memories of the gnomes, and the instrument they use is a gun, not a metaphorical one, a memory gun pointed at a person's forehead that pulls a specific set of recollections out and leaves the rest intact. Consider how ordinary the target is. Lazy, Susan runs the diner. She poured coffee, she saw something she was not supposed to see, and so she is brought to a basement and adjusted. She will go back to work tomorrow with a hole in her where an afternoon used to be, and she will never know the hole is there. That is the design of the thing. A successful erasure leaves no scar the victim can find. The machinery around the gun is where the episode's institutional imagination becomes fully clear, and it is worth slowing down to look at it. Each erased memory is not destroyed, it is stored. The gun captures the memory in a glass canister, and that canister is fired through a system of pneumatic tubes into a storage chamber, and the chamber has a name. It is called the Hall of the Forgotten. Someone in the society named it. Someone decided that the place where stolen recollections are kept deserved a title, and chose one with a kind of solemn grandeur. This is not a gang hiding evidence. It is an organization that has built infrastructure, developed a filing system, and given its archive a dignified name, all in the service of removing experiences from people who never consented to lose them. Walk into that hall with the children and look at what is on the shelves. A statue of a robed figure stands at the center, presiding, and around it are the canisters, each one a life or a fragment of a life. Some of them are labeled. One bears the name Preston Northwest, the town's wealthiest man, which tells you that money bought no exemption from this process. One is labeled for McGucket himself, and one carries the name Jeffrey Kennock, a person who appears nowhere else in the series, mentioned in no other episode, existing only as a word on a canister in an underground vault. That detail is quietly the most unsettling object in the room. Here is a human being reduced entirely to a container of things he was made to forget, and the story never tells us who he was. He is a name in the archive of the erased, And that is the whole of what remains of him within the story. The hall holds more than memories. It holds people, flattened into inventory. Then comes the revelation that reframes everything the children have seen, and it is not a villain from outside the town at all. The memory gun was invented by Fiddleford McGucket. The society was founded by Fiddleford McGucket. The shouting, ruined old man on the edge of town, the one whose missing past started this entire investigation, is the architect of the machine that erased it. He built the instrument, and he built the organization, and he did it because he could not cope with the weirdness the town kept forcing on him. The victim and the inventor are the same person. The absence the children were investigating was self-inflicted, at least at its origin, and the institution grew outward from one man's inability to carry what he had seen. The companion book, The Third Journal, deepens this until it becomes genuinely tragic. It explains that McGucket was the author's research assistant on the interdimensional portal, that he stood beside the man who wrote the journals and helped build a doorway to somewhere no one should reach. Whatever he witnessed in that work broke something in him, and rather than live with it, he turned his own invention on himself. The book states plainly that he used the memory gun on himself more than on anyone else, again and again, erasing his own trauma each time it surfaced. Picture the loop of that. A memory returns, bringing its pain. He removes it. Some time passes, something reminds him, or the wound reopens on its own, and he removes it again, and each removal takes a little more with it than he intended. The journal is explicit about the cost, and it is a cost that recasts a running gag into something you may not want to laugh at again. McGucket's slow decline into apparent madness, his senility, his signature dishevelment, the whole persona of the town kook, was caused by the repeated self-administered wipes. He did not go strange and then start erasing himself. He erased himself into strangeness. Every viewer who chuckled at the wild-eyed old man on the road was watching the accumulated damage of a man dismantling his own mind one canister at a time, in the belief that forgetting is the same as healing. The book dates the founding of the society to 1982, which is the exact year his own memories go blank, and so the timeline closes into a circle. The society begins where the man ends. The organization and the erasure of its founder are the same event. From there, the conspiracy became generational, and this is where the chapter's darkest suggestion lives. McGucket did not keep the machine to himself. He shared it, and others came to him the way you would come to a physician. The society's leader, Blind Ivan, was a former carnival worker who had been bullied by local teenagers over the tattoos on his face, and then traumatized after being locked inside the fair's haunted attraction. He came to McGucket and asked to have the incident removed, and once it was gone, he did not leave. He joined. Study the pattern in that, because it is the pattern of the whole institution. A person is hurt. Instead of being helped to bear the hurt is extracted. And having been relieved of it, the person becomes a believer, an operator, another set of hands on the gun. The society recruits from among the wounded by curing them of the memory of the wound, and gratitude turns them into staff. And these are not shadowy outsiders. The confirmed members include Toby Determined, the town's hapless newsman, and Bud Gleeful, an ordinary local businessman and a father. These are the neighbors. The people who ran the paper and sold you a used car were, in their off hours, descending into a museum basement to remove pieces of other people's lives, and they believed they were doing something responsible. That is the institutional horror the episode is really about. The villain is a committee of respectable townsfolk who reached a quiet consensus that some things are better forgotten, and built the apparatus to enforce that consensus on everyone else, whether or not those others agreed. The way the children ended is fitting, and it carries its own uneasy weight. Dipper takes the memory gun and turns it on Blind Ivan and the remaining members, erasing their memories of the society itself, dissolving the organization by using its own weapon against it. There is justice in the symmetry. The people who spent years taking memories from others lose the memory of ever having done so. And the institution collapses because no one left inside it remembers that it exists. But sit with the method for a moment, because the episode is honest about what it is showing. The heroes end the tyranny of forced forgetting by forcing everyone to forget. The gun is not destroyed, it is simply pointed in a new direction. The problem with a machine that erases minds is not solved by the good guys holding it, and the episode does not pretend otherwise. The last note is gentler, and it is Mabel who provides it, though even her kindness rests on the same disquieting foundation. When Blind Ivan is left with no memory of his own identity, no idea of who he is, She fills the emptiness for him. She convinces him that he is a traveling banjo minstrel named Toot Toot McBumbersnazzle. It is played for warmth, and it lands as warmth, a soft ending after a cold discovery. But notice what the moment quietly demonstrates. A blank human being will accept whatever story is placed into the space where his life used to be. Mabel's invention is affectionate where the society's was clinical, yet the mechanism underneath is identical. Erase a person and someone else decides who they become. That is the true engine of the whole conspiracy from McGucket forward. It was never only about taking memories, it was about the power that flows to whoever is holding the gun when the mind goes quiet, and how easily that power passes from hand to hand, generation to generation, in a town that decided long ago it would rather not remember. Consider what 30 years of exile does to a mind that was already frightened before it left. That is the question this chapter turns over, and the answer the series gives is not a comfortable one. Stanford Pines is often remembered as the genius of the family, the man of 6 fingers and endless notebooks. But the more honest way to see him is as a case study in what solitude and fear can build inside a person over time. He is pulled into the interdimensional portal during a physical struggle with his twin brother Stan, and from that moment he spends 3 decades traveling through the multiverse, alone, before Stan finally reactivates the machine to bring him home. The story treats this as an adventure, watch it as a horror, and it reads very differently. Think about the man he was before any of that happened. Long before the portal ever opened, Ford was already afraid enough of being watched, followed, and undermined that he built a secret underground bunker and insisted that only 2 people on Earth know where it was, himself and his research assistant, Fiddleford McGucket. That is the behavior of someone who has decided in advance that the world cannot be trusted with his location. Journal 3 records that he was voted most paranoid in junior high, a label he carried into adulthood and never quite shed. What makes the entry unforgettable is not that he admits the label. It is that he later questions whether his own belief that he had outgrown it was itself planted in him, a thought others wanted him to have so that he would lower his guard while they plotted against him. Sit with the shape of that idea. It is paranoia that has learned to eat its own recovery, a fear so total that even feeling better becomes evidence of the conspiracy. So the exile does not create the wound. It finds a wound already there and pours 30 years of isolation into it. That is the crueler version of the story. A trusting man broken by the multiverse would be a tragedy. Ford is something more unsettling, a suspicious man handed 30 years of proof that his suspicion was correct, or at least 30 years with no one present to argue otherwise. When your only companion through the dark is your own vigilance, vigilance becomes the whole personality. It has nothing to push against and no one to correct it. The clearest physical evidence of what he became lives inside his skull. At some point, Ford had a metal plate implanted in his own head, and the reason is not medical in any ordinary sense. It is a barrier placed there specifically to try to stop Bill Cipher from being able to enter his mind. Hold that picture still. This is a man who no longer trusts the boundary between the inside of his head and the outside world, who believes his own thoughts can be invaded, and who responds by having his body surgically fortified against a trespasser. The horror here is quiet and intimate. It is not a monster in the hallway. It is the conviction that the last private room a person owns, their own mind, has a door that someone else can walk through, and the decision to weld that door shut with metal. His mantra through all of this is 2 words: trust no one. The show lets those words stand for a long time as the philosophy of a survivor, and on the surface they sound like hard-won wisdom. But the most human thing Ford ever writes is the moment he takes them back. Later, reflecting, he renounces the mantra, and he replaces it with something gentler and far harder to live by. Trust, he decides in effect, should not be given unconditionally, but it should be given a chance to be earned. Notice how small a mercy that is and how large. He is not becoming naive. He is only allowing that other people might be permitted to prove themselves, that the door might open for someone who knocks patiently enough. For a man who armored his own brain against intrusion, letting anyone earn a way back in is nearly a resurrection. The cost of his path did not fall on him alone, and that is worth holding on to because isolation of Ford's kind tends to consume the people nearest to it. While helping to build the portal, Fiddleford McGucket glimpsed the other side of it, and what he saw there was enough to permanently damage his mind. He came back horrified, changed, and eventually he invented a memory-erasing gun in a desperate attempt to forget the visions. This is the same man Ford had trusted with the location of his bunker, one of the very few people he let close. And the reward for that closeness was a mind broken by the same abyss Ford was chasing. Ford is, in part, the horror's doorway, and not simply its victim. The people he pulls into his orbit pay for standing near a man who cannot stop looking into the dark. The show keeps the danger of that machine alive even while Ford is gone. In Not What He Seems, Stan reads Journal 1 and learns that running the portal produces temporary gravity anomalies as a side effect, the ground itself loosening its grip on the world. He works the machine anyway. He sets a rigged timer synced to his own wristwatch, and he tells the children in his care that he does not care how dangerous it is. That single-minded refusal is Stan's, not Ford's, but it rhymes with something in his brother. Both men, in their own ways, decide that a person beyond a sealed door is worth breaking the rules of reality to reach. One of them spends 30 years making the darkness his home. The other spends 30 years trying to tear a hole back to him, indifferent to the risk. Which brings the story to the reunion and to the single gesture that tells you everything about who Ford became out there. When he finally emerges from the reactivated portal after those 30 years apart, his first act upon seeing his twin brother again is not gratitude. It is a punch to the face. Consider how strange that is on its surface and how much sense it makes underneath. Journal 3 explains it. Ford was furious at being rescued because in the instant Stan activated the portal and pulled him back to Earth, he had been moments away from destroying Bill Cipher for good. The rescue was, to him, an interruption. 30 years of hunting, 30 years of armor and mantras and metal plates, and at the very edge of victory, the multiverse spits him out onto his brother's floor, the enemy still alive. He does not come home relieved. He comes home robbed. The love and the loathing arrive in the same fist. That is the psychological horror the chapter is really about, and it is not the creatures Ford met between worlds. It is the way exile rewrites a person until the people who love them read as obstacles, until being saved feels like being sabotaged, until the first human touch after 3 decades of solitude is a blow. Rescue does not restore Ford, it drags him out of the only mission that had held him together, and leaves him still braced for an attack that is no longer coming. It is worth remembering how carefully the show built this figure. The creator, Alex Hirsch, cast J.K. Simmons to voice Stanford Pines, and Simmons' first appearance in the role came in A Tale of Two Stans, which premiered on Disney XD earlier in the series' run. There is something fitting in giving this particular character a voice that can turn on a single word from warmth to menace, from the scholar to the man who welded his own head shut. Ford is written to be admired and to be feared in the same breath, and the performance holds both. He is proof that a story for children can look, without blinking, at what a person becomes when fear is the only thing that survives the journey and can still leave a door open at the very end, for trust to be earned back one patient knock at a time. Consider the shape of what Gideon Gleeful wants, and then consider that he is a child. In the 4th episode of Season 1, a small psychic performer who runs a show called The Tent of Telepathy meets Mabel, and something closes over him at once. The crush arrives fully formed, obsessive from the first moment, and the very next day he appears at the Mystery Shack to declare that he wants to be more than friends. On the surface, the show frames this as a comic mismatch, the tiny showman and the girl who does not return his feeling. Underneath, the machinery of the season is already turning, and it is not a comedy of manners. It is a story about a boy who decides that a girl belongs to him, and who spends the rest of the season trying to make the world agree. Watch what happens when Mabel says no. She does the ordinary, healthy thing. She formally breaks up with him, ends a relationship she never really consented to in the first place. And Gideon does not accept it as an answer. He reaches instead for his supernatural mystic amulet, and he turns it not on Mabel but on Dipper because he has decided that Dipper is the reason that her brother has turned her against him. There is a pattern in that worth naming. The rejection cannot be real to Gideon because in his understanding, Mabel could not possibly refuse him on her own. There has to be an interference, an enemy, someone to blame and to punish. The amulet is the fantasy made physical. It is the belief that the right amount of force applied to the right obstacle will restore the outcome he was owed. The episode does not end on the fight. It ends on a quieter and colder revelation, that Gideon already secretly possesses a book he calls Journal 2, a supernatural research volume that matches Dipper's journal but carries a different number. This detail changes the register of everything that came before it. The crush was never the whole of him. Before he ever met the twins, before the immediate infatuation, he held hidden knowledge of the strange machinery under this town. So the obsession with Mabel is not the origin of his danger. It is a new use he has found for a power he already carried. He is not a lovesick boy who stumbled into the supernatural. He is someone with resources, patience, and secrets, who has now attached all of it to a person who does not want him. By one of the season's later episodes, we are allowed inside his room, and the room tells you what the smiling stage act conceals. His bedroom door is covered with pictures of Mabel, more than one, arranged and kept. Around them, he has built handmade models of the Pines family and of the Mystery Shack itself, small figures he uses while he plots against the people they represent. Study it as more than a joke. This is the architecture of fixation, the collected likeness of a girl and the miniature simulation of her whole family, kept in a private space where a child can rehearse power over them. The pictures on the door are surveillance turned into decoration. The models are the world reduced to a size he can hold and move at will. And in the same episode, the metaphor stops being a metaphor. Gideon shrinks Dipper and Mabel with a device and carries them back to his house. And he takes the miniature Mabel and places her inside a bag of gummy koala candies in his room. She is captive there, kept one small thing among his other small things. The show plays it with candy-colored brightness, but hold the fact still and look at it plainly. He has literally made her tiny, literally contained her, literally set her among the objects on his shelf. Everything the pictures and the models only suggested is now the actual event. The girl he could not possess as a person he has, briefly, possessed as a possession. That is the truest picture of coercive control the season offers, and it is dressed as a sight gag about koala gummies. For a stretch after this, the surface story becomes about the deed to the Mystery Shack, about property and revenge on the Pines family, and it is easy to read the Mabel thread as having faded. It has not faded. It has gone underground into the same appetite for control, now aimed at the house instead of the girl. In the 19th episode, Gideon breaks into the Mystery Shack safe, seeking the property deed. Stan stops him and locks the safe again, and here Gideon does something that measures exactly how far he is willing to go. He summons the demon Bill Cipher to invade Stan's mind and extract the safe combination. Set aside the spectacle and consider the choice. A child reaches past every ordinary limit and opens a door to a mind-invading demon, not for survival, not in desperation, but to get a number out of an old man's head. The willingness is the point. There is no cost he treats as too high, no boundary, his own or anyone else's, that he regards as fixed. When even Bill fails to retrieve the combination, Gideon does not stop and reconsider. He resorts to dynamite, blowing the safe apart to take the deed himself. Notice the progression across a single sequence. First the quiet intrusion, then the supernatural violation of another person's mind, then raw explosive force. It is the amulet from the 4th episode written large. When a subtle means of taking what he wants is refused, he escalates, and when the supernatural means is refused, he escalates again. The refusals never turn him back. They only change the size of the tool. The season's 20th episode opens inside a nightmare that also serves as a recap, and it confirms that this time the escalation worked. Gideon has stolen the deed to the Mystery Shack, and the theft has consequences that reach the whole family. The Pines are forced out of their home, made to move in with Suze and his grandmother. The house that stood behind everything, the models on his shelf, the safe, the dynamite, is now his, and the family that lived in it is scattered. For a moment, the boy who could not make a girl love him has succeeded at taking the ground beneath her feet. It is a reminder that fixation of this kind does real damage even when it never wins the thing it originally wanted. It wanted Mabel. It settled for a while on ruining everyone she belongs to. The finale brings the two threads back into one image. Gideon pilots a giant robot built by McGucket, And inside its huge mechanical body, he corners Dipper and Mabel. He grabs Mabel, and he declares that he will rule Gravity Falls with her as his queen. Hold those two facts together, the machine and the sentence. He has finally assembled the maximum expression of force, a towering robot that lets a small child physically overpower the people who told him no. And the first thing he does with that power is reach out and seize the girl and announce a future for her that she was never asked about. The koala gummy bag has become a robot's fist. Word queen is the same claim the pictures on his door were making all along, that she is a thing to be placed where he wants her, that her role in his life is decided by him and not by her. From the immediate crush in the 4th episode to this grip in the 20th, the desire never changed shape. Only its scale did. What began as a boy declaring he wanted to be more than friends ends as a boy holding a girl in a machine and calling it a coronation. There is a small correction worth making before anything else, because the record deserves precision, and because the mistake is a common one. The episode called Little Gift Shop of Horrors, which aired on the 4th of October in 2014, is often reached for when people want to talk about Gravity Falls at its most grotesque. It is the 6th entry in the 2nd season, a Halloween anthology built from 3 unrelated stories, one titled Hands Off, one titled Abaconings, and one titled Clay Day. It holds a strange place in the show's history. Fans generally set it apart, treat it as the one installment that sits outside the series canon, a curiosity rather than a chapter. And whatever else it contains, it does not contain a shape-shifting monster. The creature people are usually remembering, when they reach for that title, belongs somewhere else entirely. It belongs to Into the Bunker, the 2nd season's 2nd installment, first broadcast on the 4th of August in 2014, 2 months earlier than the anthology it is often confused with. This is the episode that gave Gravity Falls its most explicit sequence of body horror, and it is worth being exact about where such things live, because the horror of this particular creature is precisely a horror of things not staying where they belong. To attribute it to the wrong episode is, in a quiet way, to repeat the monster's own trick. Consider the shape of its making in the real world first. Into the Bunker was written by Matt Chapman and Alex Hirsch and directed by Joe Pitt. On its original broadcast, it drew roughly 940,000 viewers in the United States, and it received an A grade from the AV Club. Those are modest, verifiable facts, the kind that anchor a thing that might otherwise feel like a fever. A little under 1 million people watched it the first night. A critic gave it the highest mark. And inside that carefully made half hour, the show set loose one of the strangest ideas it would ever hold. The story the episode tells, within the show's canon, begins long before any of the children arrive. Stanford Pines, the man the story calls Ford, was excavating tunnels beneath Gravity Falls, digging out the space for a hidden research bunker when he found a mysterious egg. Picture the scientist alone underground, turning up something that should not be there, something whole and waiting. He did not know what it was. In time, the egg hatched, and what came out of it is the creature the series calls the Shape Shifter, cataloged in the Journal 3 material under a plainer and colder name, Experiment number 210, a number as though it were one of many, as though there were an order of these things, and this was simply the 210th entry in a list. What Ford did with it is the part that matters, because it tells you how afraid of it he was. He contained it. A steel cage went up inside his bunker to hold the creature, and even that was not judged to be enough. He began building a cryogenic freezing chamber, a machine to hold the thing frozen and permanent, a containment meant to last beyond his own attention and beyond his own life. This is the effort of a man who understands that a locked cage is a temporary answer to a permanent problem. He was still building that chamber, still in the middle of the work, when the creature broke free. The freezing was never finished. The cage failed. And so the horror of the episode is not the horror of a thing that was never controlled, but the more particular horror of a thing that was controlled carefully by an intelligent and frightened man, and got loose anyway during the exact window when the better lock was not yet built. Here it is worth clearing away another common assumption because it changes the whole meaning of the space. The bunker is not a government facility. Nothing on screen depicts it as one. It was built and used privately by Ford as a fallout shelter and a personal research lab, and it is entered through a hidden mechanical tree, a piece of concealed machinery that opens the ground. There is no institution standing behind the cage, no agency or containment program run by men in offices. There is one person, one scientist who found something underground and decided, alone, that the responsible thing was to keep it and study it and eventually freeze it forever. The loneliness of that is part of the fear. The thing was never anyone's job but his, and when it escaped, there was no one coming because no one else knew it was there. Now to the creature itself, and to the choice that gives the sequence its charge. The shapeshifter was voiced mostly by Mark Hamill. That single piece of casting tells you how the show wanted you to feel. Hamill is an actor whose voice carries decades of association with a particular kind of playful, patient menace, a voice that can smile and threaten in the same breath, and handing him a creature made of borrowed faces is a decision that understands exactly what it is doing. The monster sounds like it is enjoying itself. It sounds like it has all the time in the world. But the truly clever detail is what happens when the creature stops being itself. Across the episode, it takes many forms. It becomes a mascot from the label of a can of beans, a cheerful commercial face made flesh. It becomes the gremlin and a gnome and the hide behind. Drawing on its own bestiary of things half seen, it becomes Mabel. And it becomes Dipper, and it becomes Wendy. And here the production made a decision that most viewers feel before they understand. When the shapeshifter wears the form of Dipper or the form of Wendy, those brief lines are not spoken by Mark Hamill. They are spoken by the character's regular actors, Jason Ritter and Linda Cardellini, the same voices you have trusted for the length of the show. Sit with what that does to you as a listener. The monster looks like the boy, and when it opens the boy's mouth, the sound that comes out is the boy's actual voice, the real one, the one you have no reason to doubt. There is no wrongness in the sound to warn you. The performance itself is the trap. In most horror, the imposter is betrayed by some small flaw, a coldness in the eyes, a wrongness in the cadence, and the audience is given the mercy of noticing before the characters do. Gravity Falls removes that mercy. By using the genuine actors for the stolen forms, the show denies you the private certainty that you, at least, can tell the difference. The face is copied. The voice is not a copy. It is the thing itself, lifted whole. And then, underneath, when the shape drops away, Hamill returns, and the return is the only tell you are ever given, arriving always a moment too late to help. That is the real body horror of the sequence. And it is worth being clear that it is not primarily a matter of gore. It is a horror of identity, of the idea that a face and a voice, the two things by which we know the people we love, can be worn by something that is neither of them. The show reaches for the oldest fear underneath all shapeshifter stories, which is not the fear of the monster's true form, but the fear that you will trust the false one. When the creature is Dipper, you want to trust it. Ritter's voice makes you want to, and the wanting is the wound. Set that beside the containment story, and the two halves complete each other. Ford found an egg and built a cage, and the cage held a thing that could be anyone. Of course he wanted it frozen. Of course a steel cage felt insufficient. What do you do with a prisoner that can become its own guard, that can wear the face of the man holding the key? The cryogenic chamber was not paranoia. It was the only honest response to a creature whose entire nature is the erasure of the line between captor and captive, between the trusted and the intruder. He needed it not merely locked but stopped, held still, its shifting ended, because a shifting thing can never truly be contained, only paused. And it broke free before the pause was ready. That is where the series leaves the deepest chill in the timing of it. Not a monster that was never held, but a monster held by a careful man who was building something better and ran out of time. The steel cage was the interim measure. The interim was where it escaped. Somewhere under Gravity Falls, reached through a tree that opens like a machine, a private bunker held experiment number 210, and the man who found the egg is the only one who ever knew the shape of what he had, or how many faces it could wear, or whose. The book arrived in the summer of 2024, and it changed how a certain conversation about this show could be held. The Book of Bill, written and illustrated by Alex Hirsch, was published on the 23rd of July that year by Hyperion Avenue Books, an imprint under the Disney umbrella. What matters most about it, before a single page is read, is who it was made for. This was not a companion for the young viewers who first found the show on a children's channel. It was marketed openly for teenagers and adults, and that shift in audience is the permission slip for everything the book does next. Consider the choice of narrator. The entire volume is told in the voice of Bill Cipher himself, a demon recounting his own history, expanding the events of the series, and reaching back into his relationship with Stanford Pines. He is, by design, unreliable. Every claim he makes about Ford passes first through his own vanity, his own grievance, his own need to be seen as the wounded party. And this is the quiet genius of the format, because an abuser rarely narrates the abuse as abuse. He narrates it as love that went unappreciated. So when the crew set out to describe what happened between these two, they did not hand us a neutral report. They handed us the perpetrator's diary and trusted us to read against it. Hirsch himself has not been vague about what he was building. In an interview recorded around the book's release, he described the relationship between Ford and Bill as, in his words, very complex and fucked up. That is not the language of a creator softening a villain for a coloring book. It is a writer naming a specific kind of damage. And in that same conversation, he offered a line that reframes the loneliness at the center of Ford's story. Ford, he explained, would not describe himself as being alone. Ford would say that he had a very important relationship in his life with Bill, but that he did not have a friend. Sit with the shape of that sentence for a moment. A relationship that consumes the space where a friend should be and leaves the person inside it insisting they are not lonely at all. That is how isolation actually feels from the inside. It does not feel empty. It feels full of the wrong thing. Once you hold that frame, the beats of the book begin to arrange themselves along a very familiar pattern. There's a moment, summarized in CBR's coverage of the book, when Ford goes quiet on their partnership, when he begins to pull back from the work they were doing together. Bill responds with a monologue that reviewers described as sounding like it comes from a toxic ex-partner. The substance of it is the oldest line in the manual of a control. No one else, he tells Ford in effect, will ever care about him or understand him the way Bill does. Think about what that sentence is engineered to do. It is not affection. It is offense. It takes the victim's entire future and paints it gray so that the only color left in the room is the one the abuser is holding. You're not special to anyone but me, and so you cannot afford to leave me. That is grooming and isolation folded into a single breath. The book pushes the metaphor further still into territory that reads almost like farce until you notice how sad it is. Bill and Ford begin to accuse each other of the equivalent of cheating. Ford charges Bill with going off to inspire other scientists, whispering into other minds, spreading his attention where it was promised to be exclusive. Bill, in turn, accuses Ford of blowing off the portal building they were meant to be doing together, of spending his hours instead with Fiddleford McGucket. And here the demon's contempt becomes almost comically petty. He calls McGucket the third wheel hillbilly, a phrase dripping with the jealousy of a partner who cannot tolerate the beloved having anyone else in the room. A collaborator, a friend, a colleague, reduced to an interloper, a threat, a rival for affection that Bill believes he alone is owed. When a person begins to resent the people their partner simply spends time with, we have a name for that, and it is not friendship. Then there is the breakdown, and this is the fact that tips the whole portrait from menace into something stranger and more human. After Ford finally cuts contact, Bill does not respond with the cold, cosmic scheming you might expect from an all-powerful entity. He falls apart. He gets drunk at a bar. He is arrested for causing a scene at a Mexican restaurant, where he stands there and asks the staff for, in his exact words, 1 sixer, please. Sixer is his nickname for Ford, drawn from the 6 fingers on each of Ford's hands, and here he is, ordering the man like a drink, as though grief could be served across a counter. When he is refused, he cries and he destroys the place. Picture that, a being of enormous power, reduced to a weeping wreck in a restaurant, smashing furniture because the one person he cannot possess has walked out the door. It is the abuser at his most pathetic and, uncomfortably, his most recognizable, because the rage of someone who has lost their control over another person often looks exactly this small. But the book does not let us mistake that pathos for harmlessness, and this is the line the crew clearly wanted drawn. Bill's control over Ford does not stay in the realm of words and manipulation. It escalates into the body. He begins non-consensually possessing Ford, taking hold of the man's own physical form without his consent. He forces Ford to stand on a roof in freezing winter weather. He makes him forget his own name. And with that, the metaphor stops being a metaphor. Everything before it, the flattery, the isolation, the jealousy, the tears, was the grooming that made this possible. The final expression of that dynamic is a person who no longer owns his own body or even his own identity, made to stand exposed in the cold and stripped of the one word that was ever purely his. What the crew accomplished, in choosing to tell all of this through Bill's own preening, self-pitying voice, is to show the pattern from the only angle that ever truly reveals it. The abuser almost never sees the abuse. He sees a great love betrayed. He sees a partner who wandered, who went quiet, who spent too long with the hillbilly who forced him to do the things he did. And so the book asks its older readers to do the hard work that survivors have always had to do. To read the tender words and hear the cage inside them. Bill Cipher, having gained a physical form, descends over Gravity Falls and declares himself the town's new ruler. This is the moment his gang of interdimensional criminals is loosed on the population, and what follows is not a battle in any ordinary sense. A battle implies two sides trading blows. What happens to Gravity Falls in the aftermath of Bill's arrival is closer to occupation, to the slow administration of cruelty, and the series lingers on that cruelty in ways that reward a second look. Think about what it means to make a children's cartoon dwell not on the fight against a tyrant, but on the texture of life under one. The instrument of that occupation is a swarm of bat-like creatures called eye-bats, and their function is simple and terrible. They fly through the town, turning townspeople into stone, not killing them, petrifying them. There is a distinction there that matters, because a corpse is an ending and a statue is a suspension. A person held in place, conscious or not, we are never told, frozen mid-gesture wherever the beam found them. The eye-bats do not choose, they do not judge. They move through the streets, converting the living into furniture for a new order. And the town empties of motion the way a photograph empties a moment of its future. Bill's cruelty toward the residents is not confined to petrification, and this is where his particular flavor of evil becomes clear. He traps Mabel inside a giant floating bubble as part of his takeover, a prison shaped like a toy. He turns Gompers, the goat, into a giant. He transforms Seuss's grandmother into a chair. Consider that last one for a moment. A grandmother, an old woman, converted into a piece of furniture that someone might sit on without knowing. These are not strategic acts. They win Bill nothing tactically. They are demonstrations, the reality-warping equivalent of a conqueror, rearranging a town's population for his own amusement. And the arbitrariness is the point. Under Bill, a person is not a person. A person is raw material for a joke only he finds funny. Above the ruined town, he conjures a floating pyramid, the Pyramid, and installs it as his base of operations. Around him, he gathers 9 named allies to celebrate the fall of Gravity Falls, a collection of monsters with names like a nightmare's roll call: 8-Ball, Amorphous Shape, Hectorgon, Keyhole, Cryptos, Pacifier, Pyronica, Teeth, and Xanthar, the henchmaniacs. They are there to revel, and their revelry is the second layer of the cruelty. The town does not merely fall, its fall is an occasion, a party, and the suffering below is the entertainment above. The clearest single image of what Bill's reign means is inside the pyramid, and it is among the eeriest things the series ever built. Bill takes dozens of the townspeople who were petrified into stone and has them assembled into a seat for himself, a throne made of people. The series gives it a name that leaves nothing to interpretation: the throne of human agony. Sit with the design of that. A ruler needs a throne, and a throne is a symbol of the right to rule. Bill's throne is his subjects, the very people he conquered, stacked and shaped into a chair so that he can literally sit on the population he has broken. The metaphor of tyranny made physical, the citizenry reduced to the structure that elevates the tyrant, is rendered here with no metaphor left at all. It is just true, and someone documents it. The reporter Chandra Jimenez sneaks into the pyramid and broadcasts footage of the throne of petrified townspeople to the surviving population. This is a small act inside an enormous catastrophe, and it is one of the bravest things anyone does in the whole arc. She is not a fighter. She has no unicorn hair and no plan to win. She has a camera and the conviction that the truth of what Bill has done should be seen. She finishes her report even as an IBAT turns her to stone mid-broadcast. Picture the exactness of that. The beam reaching her while she is still speaking, and her choice, in the seconds she has, to keep speaking. She becomes another figure in the count of the petrified, but she becomes that figure while doing her job, and the footage survives her transformation. It is the difference between being taken and refusing to be silent while you are taken. Not everyone has been turned to stone. A group of survivors takes shelter at the Mystery Shack, and the roster of who remains tells its own story about who Bill's reign spares by accident rather than mercy. Pacifica Northwest is there, the rich girl, Old Man McGucket, the town's ruined genius, Sheriff Blubbs, various town monsters, creatures who under any other circumstance would be the threat, and who now huddle with the humans against a larger one. They are protected by a barrier made from unicorn hair, a fragile-sounding defense that holds because Bill's power, for all its scale, has rules it cannot break. The shack becomes the last free ground in a town that no longer belongs to its people, and the mix of who ends up there, the wealthy and the mad and the law and the monstrous, is its own small argument that catastrophe does not respect the categories a town uses to sort itself. Life inside that barrier is not triumphant. It is scarcity. Food dwindles, refugees are injured. The survivors are not planning a glorious counterstrike so much as trying to outlast a siege with resources that are running out. And this is another place where the arc refuses the easy shape of adventure. The heroism here is logistical before it is martial. It is McGucket, the broken engineer, who provides the answer, and the answer is beautifully absurd and entirely in keeping with the series. They convert the shack itself into a giant fighting robot, the Shacktron, and go out to battle Bill's forces. The tourist trap, the fake mystery house Stan built to fleece visitors, becomes the machine the town's last free people used to fight back. There is a quiet justice in that. The building founded on harmless deception turns out to be the thing that stands when everything honest has already fallen. The turning of the whole catastrophe rests, it turns out, on a single detail, and it comes from an unlikely source. A caged Gideon Gleeful, the child con artist who spent so long as a villain in his own right, reveals the weakness. Mayor Tyler is the load-bearing human holding Bill's throne together. Think about what that phrase implies. The throne of human agony is not merely a pile of the petrified. It is a structure, and like any structure, it has a keystone, one person whose removal brings the whole thing down. Pulling Tyler from the stone throne collapses it, and when it collapses, all the petrified townspeople are restored to normal. Every statue in the town becomes a person again. The cruelty that seemed permanent, the population frozen into furniture and architecture, was undone by finding the one piece that held it up. That the information comes from Gideon of all people is the arc noting that in a crisis, this total, old villains and old heroes, stop being the relevant categories. But restoring the townspeople does not end Bill, and the arc's final move is the one that gives this chapter its weight. To defeat Bill, Stan Pines willingly lets Ford fire a memory-erasing gun into his own mind. Bill is occupying Stan's mind at the time, and so Bill is erased along with Stan's memories. Understand exactly what is being traded here. The only way to destroy the tyrant is to destroy the mind he is hiding in, and that mind belongs to a man who agrees to it. Stan does not lose a battle. He gives up himself, his whole accumulated life, every memory that makes him who he is, so that the creature wearing his thoughts can be erased with them. It is a sacrifice with no glory in it, no last words that fix anything, just a man consenting to become a blank so his family and his town can be free. What the whole arc argues, when you follow it from the IBATs to the erasure, is that Bill's evil was never really about power in the abstract. It was about what he did to specific people. A grandmother made into a chair, a goat made monstrous, a reporter caught mid-sentence, dozens of citizens stacked into a throne so he could sit on them. The show could have made his defeat about strength meeting greater strength. Instead, it made his reign about cruelty and his defeat about sacrifice, and it asked its young audience to hold the difference between the two. That is a serious thing to ask, and Gravity Falls asks it plainly, and then it lets a man give up his own mind to answer it. For years, Ford Pines had done nothing but look. He had come to Gravity Falls the way a scientist comes to any unexplained thing, with instruments and patience and the assumption that the strange has an order underneath it. And for years he cataloged the anomalies of that small Oregon town without ever finding the source of them. Then he found an incantation. He recited it. And in reciting it, he summoned something into his own mind, a triangular entity that would give itself the name Bill Cipher. Consider the shape of that discovery for a moment. The thing Ford had been chasing did not live in a cave or a forest clearing. It arrived the instant he spoke the right words aloud, and it arrived inside him. What Bill offered in that first meeting was not power and not wealth. It was recognition. Bill introduced himself as a muse, a being who claimed to choose a single brilliant mind once every century and to visit that mind for the purpose of inspiration. Think about who Ford was and what a sentence like that would do to him. Here was a man who had spent his life being the smartest person in every room and being punished for it, a man whose intelligence had made him lonely rather than celebrated. And now a voice out of the deeper structure of the universe was telling him that he had been selected, not tolerated, chosen. The flattery was precise because it was aimed at exactly the wound that a lifetime had left open. Bill did not lie about being extraordinary. He simply attached that word to Ford, and Ford, who had wanted to hear it for so long, let him in. The letting in was literal, and it came with a ritual. Bill's deals are sealed with a handshake, and the handshake is wrapped in blue flame, a small cold fire around the joined hands. The terms were plain enough on their face. Ford had research questions, and Bill offered answers to them. In return, Bill asked only to be allowed unrestricted access to Ford's mind. Read that phrase slowly because it is the whole tragedy folded into a single clause. Unrestricted access, not a consultation, not a visit, but the removal of every door and every lock inside the one place a person believes is theirs alone. Ford agreed, and the flame closed around the bargain, and from the outside it would have looked like the greatest stroke of luck a lonely genius ever had. With Bill secretly guiding him, the work accelerated. Ford began to assemble the anomalies of Gravity Falls into a single coherent picture, and the picture he arrived at was that these strange things did not originate in the town at all. They leaked. They came through from somewhere else, from another dimension, pressing against ours through a rift. And the weirdness that Ford had spent years collecting was simply the overflow of that leak. He called the idea his grand unified theory of weirdness, and it is a genuinely elegant thought, the kind of unifying stroke that scientists dream of, one clean explanation folding 100 scattered mysteries into itself. What Ford could not see because the guiding hand was hidden was that the theory had been shaped for him. He believed he was following evidence toward a conclusion. He was being walked toward a door someone else wanted opened. Because the natural next step, once you believe another dimension is leaking through a rift, is to want to see it, to build a way through. And so Ford set out to construct an interdimensional portal, and for that enormous task he did not work alone. He brought in a research assistant, a nervous, gifted engineer named Fiddleford McGucket, and together the two of them built the machine. It matters that Ford had a partner here, a human one, someone standing in the same room breathing the same air, because it means that when the warning came, it came from a friend and not from a stranger, and Ford still chose not to hear it. The warning arrived during the first activation test. They sent a test dummy through the portal, a simple object, a stand-in for a person, and the portal pulled it back out. But it did not come back clean. As the dummy returned, Fiddleford was accidentally dragged partway in, caught by the machine, exposed for a moment to whatever waits beyond the rift. He was pulled back, he survived. But something in the man who came out was not the same as the man who had gone in. What he said afterward has the cadence of prophecy. And the episode gives it to us as a warning delivered in a shaken voice. When gravity falls and the earth becomes the sky, fear the beast with just one eye. That is the line delivered in the flashback that the series titles A Tale of Two Stands. Sit with how strange it is that a jittery small-town engineer suddenly speaks in rhymed prophecy. He is not composing, he is reporting. He has seen something through that portal that reorganized him into a person who talks this way, and the beast with one eye is not a metaphor he invented. It is a thing he looked at. The series does not explain in that flashback exactly what he saw. That explanation is held back and delivered later in the pages of Journal 3, and it is worth understanding what those pages reveal because it changes the whole meaning of the test. Fiddleford's trauma, the journal tells us, came from glimpsing. Bill removed his physical exoskeleton in order to feed inside the other dimension. Return to Bill's introduction with that image in your mind. The being who called himself a muse, who spoke of inspiring brilliant minds across the centuries, is beyond the portal, in his own dimension, taking off his body like a shell so that he can eat. Fiddleford did not see a demon in the abstract. He saw the true form of the exact entity Ford had shaken hands with, doing the thing that entity actually does, and the sight of it broke something in him that never fully mended. So he did the only rational thing a frightened, clear-eyed man could do. He begged Ford to stop. He urged him to abandon the portal, to destroy it, to unmake the machine before it could do what it was built to do. And Ford refused. This is the hinge of the entire story, and I want to be careful about how much weight it carries. Ford was not stupid, and Ford was not evil. He had spent years on this work. He had a beautiful theory. He had a voice in his head that had told him he was chosen, and that voice had never once, to his knowledge, steered him wrong. Against all of that stood one shaken man rhyming about a beast. Ford chose the machine. And so Fiddleford quit the project and walked away, and Ford was left alone with his portal and his muse. What came next was the confrontation, and it belongs to the episode the show calls Not What He Seems, where the truth finally surfaces. Ford went directly to Bill. He asked, and Bill, no longer needing the disguise, confirmed the real plan. The completed portal was never a window for observation, it was a door. And Bill intended to use it to merge his home dimension with the real world, an apocalyptic event that Bill himself names Weirdmageddon. Every kindness, every flattering word about brilliant minds and centuries of inspiration, every answered research question, had been in service of getting one particular human to build one particular door. The muse was a construction foreman. Ford had been the labor. And here is the part of the story I find hardest to sit with, and also the part that makes Ford worth the show's attention. When he learned the truth, he broke it off. He ended the partnership. He refused to be the hand that opened the door, even though Bill warned him as he broke away that he could not stop the dimensional rift from happening regardless. Think about the position that leaves a man in. Ford now understood that he had been used to build an apocalypse, that the being he trusted most had never been anything but a liar, and that walking away might not even prevent the disaster. He walked away anyway. The bargain that founds all the darkness in this show is not a bargain a fool made. It is a bargain a brilliant and lonely man made because the terms were written to exploit precisely the person he was. And the founding dark act of Gravity Falls is not the deal itself, but the moment Ford chooses to break it, knowing it may already be too late. There is one more detail, small and encoded, that tells you how completely Ford's feeling toward Bill had inverted. In Journal 3, there is a passage hidden behind Bill's name, written in a symbol substitution cipher, the kind of code you use when you do not want a thing read casually. Decoded, it reads, liar, monster, snappy dresser. 3 words, and the third one is a joke, and the joke is the most human thing on the page. A man who has been betrayed at the deepest level, who has every reason to write pure fury, cannot quite resist the gallows wit of admitting that the thing that ruined his life did at least look good doing it. It is the sound of someone who has processed his rage enough to laugh at the edge of it, and it tells you Ford survived the betrayal as a person, not just as a warning in someone else's story. The consequences of that founding act ripple forward past Ford entirely, and by the time we reach the events of Not What He Seems, another man stands at the portal, and it is not Ford, it is Stan. The episode opens on him working the machine, and the way it shows him is deliberate. He is rigging drums of toxic chemicals. He is syncing a countdown timer to his wristwatch, tying the fate of this dangerous device to the ordinary object on his arm. and he makes clear, in effect, that he does not care how dangerous it is. Set that beside everything you now know about the portal's true purpose, and the image acquires a terrible tension. Here is a man committing himself completely to running a machine whose real function is to open a door that a con artist in another dimension has been waiting decades to walk through. Whether Stan knows the whole of it or not, he is willing to risk everything on this thing, and he learns pieces of it as he goes. In that same episode, he reads Journal 1, and from it, he learns that the machine produces a side effect, temporary gravity anomalies, the world briefly loosening its hold on things. The town's name, its whole quiet joke, is written into the physics of the device. Gravity falls. What Fiddleford said in his prophecy about gravity falling and the earth becoming the sky was not poetry after all. It was a description of what the machine does when it runs. The warning and the side effect are the same event seen from two different distances. The episode brings Stan to the edge of honesty. He resolves, finally, to tell Dipper and Mabel his secret about the machine, to stop carrying it alone, to let the two children he has been protecting understand what he has been building beneath their feet. And the moment he reaches that resolve, the moment the truth is about to be spoken aloud, the story takes it away from him. A heavily armored tactical team storms the Mystery Shack and secures it, led by two government agents the series names Powers and Trigger. The confession is interrupted by force. Notice the pattern the show keeps repeating across all of this. Ford's truth arrived too late, after the door was already built. Fiddleford's truth was refused. And now Stan's truth is cut off at the very second he is ready to give it. The bargain Ford made in a lonely study, years before any of these people gathered, keeps generating the same shape of tragedy. Someone finally sees clearly, and the clarity comes just a little too late or gets stopped just short of the mouth. That is the machine Bill really built, not the portal, the pattern. There is a particular pleasure in watching a person who made a beloved thing decide, years later, to show you exactly how the sausage was inspected. In June of 2022, for the show's 10th anniversary, Alex Hirsch did something most creators never do. He posted a narrated video to Twitter, and in it, he read aloud from real internal notes and email exchanges he had kept. The paper trail between himself and Disney Channel's Standards and Practices department. Standards and Practices, often shortened to S&P, is the office inside a network that reviews content for anything that might draw complaints, offend, or slip an adult meaning past a young audience. What Hirsch shared was not a highlight reel of triumphs, it was the friction itself, the small daily negotiations that shaped a cartoon line by line, and what that friction reveals is worth slowing down on. Consider the objections one at a time because each one is a tiny window into how a network reads a script differently than a viewer ever will. There was a line describing an object as, in the words of the script, scrimshawed from the tusks of Lucifer himself. S&P flagged the word Lucifer. The concern was religious complaint, the possibility that naming the devil in that particular register might trouble some parents or church groups. And yet the resolution here was gentle. S&P agreed to review it in context, which is to say they did not demand it gone outright, only that they would look again once they could see the whole scene around it. That is a softer kind of pushback, the network reserving judgment rather than swinging the axe, and it tells you the process was not always adversarial. Other notes were less accommodating. Think about the owl-themed restaurant in the cartoon called Hoo Ha's Jamboree. To most ears, hoo-ha is a word for excitement, for a commotion, the kind of fuss a rural roadside attraction might advertise. But S&P flagged hoo-ha as slang for female genitalia and asked for a change. Here, Hirsch refused. He argued in effect that it was a legitimate word with a legitimate meaning, that a restaurant promising a hoo-ha was promising a good, raucous time and nothing else. He held the line and the name stayed. What is interesting is not who won, but the collision of two reading styles. The network reads for the worst possible interpretation, the meaning a snickering teenager might supply. The writer reads for the intended one. Both readings live inside the same 3 syllables, and the whole job of the department was to police the gap between them. Sometimes the writer folded, and those moments are just as instructive. There was a t-shirt design in the show that read, Chub Pup. S&P flagged it for a sexual connotation, and unlike the owl restaurant, they persisted. Hirsch changed the text to Tub Pup, a single letter, swapped and the objection dissolved. It is a small surrender, almost invisible in the finished frame, and it shows you the texture of the negotiation. Not every hill was worth dying on. A pup in a tub is nearly as charming as a chubby one, and the cost of peace was one consonant. Then there was the word crud. S&P asked Hirsch to remove it from a script, citing that crud carried an inappropriate slang definition. Say that to yourself slowly. Crud, the word a frustrated cartoon character mutters when a plan collapses, the softest available substitute for a real curse, was itself deemed to have a hidden meaning too coarse for the channel. This is the department reasoning several layers down, past the surface word and past even the common euphemism, to some deeper slang usage most viewers would never reach for. Whether Hirsch complied or fought that one, the flag alone tells you how fine the sieve was set. Not all of the concerns were about language. Some were about gesture, about what a body on screen might be understood to mean. There is a scene involving the two town policemen, Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland, in which Blubbs puts his arm around Durland's shoulder. S&P objected. They asked that the gesture read as comical rather than flirtatious. Sit with what that request contains. The network was worried that affection between two men, even a casual arm across a shoulder, might be read as romantic, and it wanted the animation to steer that reading firmly toward the joke. Hirsch pushed back, and the moment was kept. In hindsight, given how the pair came to be understood by the show's audience, the network's instinct to sand the moment down looks less like caution and more like a small failure of nerve. Hirsch's refusal preserved something the department wanted smoothed away. The negotiations reached into specific episodes, and this is where you can see the process at the level of a single scene. In Summerween, well into the first season, the Mystery Shack throws a party, and a flyer advertising it originally read, "Bottles will be spun." That is a reference to Spin the Bottle, the kissing game, and S&P flagged the line as too suggestive for the show. A children's party at a tourist trap, and the mere promise of a spun bottle carried too much romantic charge to survive. The line was a wink, and the department does not permit winks of that particular kind. In Boss Mabel, earlier in the first season, there is a moment built around the handyman Seuss in a costume. Seuss's plan was originally to wear a giant teddy bear costume. S&P raised a concern that a grown man in a full bear suit could read as coded to the furry fandom. The subculture built around anthropomorphic animal characters, and so the costume was changed. It became a question baby mascot instead. Think about the specificity of that worry. The department was not reacting to anything in the script itself. No line, no joke, only to an association a certain audience might bring to the image of a man inside a bear. The costume was swapped to close a door that the writing had never actually opened. And in Headhunters, the season's third episode, there is a limerick, and limericks are dangerous territory by their very form. Hirsch's original opened with the most infamous first line in the English language, "There once was a man from Nantucket." Anyone who knows the tradition knows where that rhyme is expected to go, toward an ending no children's network would ever air. S&P objected to the implied obscene ending, the one the audience supplies in their own heads. Hirsch rewrote it. Nantucket became Kentucky. Then he rewrote it again, so that the line read, "There once was a dude from Kentucky." The department kept objecting because the shape of the joke lingered even after the word that made it possible was gone. You could change the place and change the man to a dude, but the ghost of the rhyme was still audible, and that ghost was the whole problem. What holds all of these together, from Lucifer to the limerick, is a single truth about how the show was made. Every frame passed through a reader whose job was to imagine the worst way it could be taken, and the finished cartoon is in part a record of that imagining. Some flags Hirsch fought and won. Some he conceded with a shrug and a swapped letter. Some reshaped a scene entirely, a bear becoming a baby, a spun bottle vanishing from a flyer. And the reason we know any of this is that the man who fought those battles decided, a decade on, that the fight was worth showing. He kept the notes. He read them out loud. He let us see the pressure the show was built against, and in doing so, he made the finished thing feel less like a smooth surface and more like something that survived. Consider what it means to end a story on purpose. When Gravity Falls premiered on Disney Channel in the summer of 2012, Alex Hirsch had already decided how it would finish. He pitched it not as a machine that could run indefinitely, generating episodes until the audience aged out, but as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. That decision sounds small. It was not. Most kids' animation of that period was built to be episodic on purpose, so that any episode could air in any order, and no viewer ever needed to have seen the last one. A finite show asks something different of a child. It asks them to remember, to wait, to feel the weight of an ending coming. Hirsch built that expectation into the foundation, and everything that made Gravity Falls psychologically dark grew out of that same root, because darkness only lands when there is somewhere permanent for it to leave a mark. To understand what the show pushed against, you have to look at the notes it received while it was being made. Over time, Hirsch began publicly sharing emails and video documentation on his account showing the standards and practices notes that Disney had sent during production. Some of it reads almost like comedy. The network objected to the word poop face. It objected to the word hoo-ha. And running underneath those smaller quarrels was a steadier, more serious pattern, one that repeated again and again across the notes, a request to cut allusions to queerness wherever they appeared. Think about what that reveals. The same institution that worried over a nonsense insult was applying real, consistent pressure to erase something quiet and human from the margins of the frame. There is one moment that shows this pressure at its most precise. In the second season episode called The Love God, a storyboard artist drew a small background gag, two elderly women sitting together as a couple at Greasy's diner. It was not a plot point. It was set dressing, the kind of detail a viewer might catch once and smile at. Standards and practices ordered the moment revised. Hirsch reportedly pushed back against the note, questioning why the moment needed to be removed at all. There is no elaborate argument in that reply, no manifesto, just the plain human refusal to accept that this needed a reason to exist. Accounts differ on whether that pushback was enough to save the moment for the broadcast version. Two old women sharing a booth, gone before anyone at home could see them. That loss matters because of what Hirsch did with it afterward. He did not stop. By the time the series reached its finale, the episode called Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, which aired in February of 2016, he had gotten Disney to approve something the earlier note had denied him. Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland, two recurring characters, are shown holding hands, a canonical same-sex couple standing inside a Disney Channel series at the moment of its ending. Hold those two scenes next to each other, the background gag that was erased and the couple in the finale that survived. The distance between them is the distance the show traveled, and the fact worth holding on to is that the victory was small and partial and hard-won, a pair of hands, approved after a fight, in the last hour of the story. What the show did next, though, is the part that reshapes the argument. Because Gravity Falls was not only a text, it was a place where people learned to make this kind of animation, and they carried what they learned outward. Consider Dana Terrace, who worked on the show as a storyboard revisionist, and then as a storyboard artist and animator from 2013 to 2016, the same window in which those standards notes were being fought over. Terrace went on to create the Owl House for the same Disney Channel, which premiered in January of 2020. And the Owl House did openly, at its center, what Gravity Falls had only managed at its edges. Its lead is Luz Naceda, a girl who has been described as the first bisexual lead character in a Disney series. Her love interest is Amity Blight, who identifies as a lesbian. This is not a background gag at a diner counter. This is the protagonist, the emotional engine of the entire show. And her relationship is not smuggled into the final frames, but built into the spine of the thing. Then, in the second season, in an episode called Ada's Requiem, the show introduced Rain Whispers, voiced by Avi Roque, reported as Disney's first explicitly non-binary character using they and them pronouns. Follow the line from the erased women in the diner to this. The same studio, roughly a decade apart, moving from cutting a couple in the background to naming a non-binary character in the text. The pressure did not vanish, but the ground had shifted, and Gravity Falls is part of why. The ending of the Owl House complicates the triumph, and honestly, it should. The show was canceled after a shortened third season. Terrace stated publicly on Reddit that the cancellation was not about ratings and not about the disruption of the pandemic, but because a Disney executive had decided the show, serialized and skewing older than the network's usual audience, simply did not fit the Disney brand. Read that reasoning carefully because it is the same objection in a new costume. The very qualities that made the show possible as a descendant of Gravity Falls, the serialization, the older sensibility, the willingness to let a story mean something and end, were the qualities named as the reason to shut it down. Progress and resistance were living in the same building at the same time. Terrace was not the only one who left Gravity Falls carrying a method. Matt Braley worked on the show before creating Amphibia for Disney Channel, which premiered in 2019, and the lineage there is not subtle. Some of its episodes are said by fans to nod directly to Gravity Falls, a knowing bow from a student to the series that shaped him. And Chris Houghton, a storyboard artist and revisionist on Gravity Falls, went on with his brother Shane Houghton, working alongside producer Rob Renzetti to create Big City Greens in 2018, a show on which Chris Houghton also voices the main character, Cricket Green. What you are looking at is not a single influential program, it is a cohort. A room full of people who learned, on Gravity Falls, that a children's cartoon could be built to end, could hold a darker feeling, could put a real relationship in the frame and fight to keep it there. And who then went and built their own shows on that understanding. This is the quiet argument of the whole story, and it is why this chapter closes the through line rather than opening a new one. The psychological darkness of Gravity Falls was never only about being scary. The willingness to frighten a child, to let a story be finite, to let lost stay lost was the same willingness that let the show treat its audience as people who could handle truth. And truth, in the specific fights this show had, sometimes meant nothing more radical than two old women sharing a diner booth, or two officers holding hands, or a protagonist allowed to love who she loves. The show fought for the small human things with the same seriousness it brought to its cosmic horror, and it lost some of those fights, and it won others, and then it sent its people out into the industry to keep fighting. So when you consider what Gravity Falls changed about what Disney and kids animation would greenlight afterward, the honest answer is not a clean victory. It is a shift in what became thinkable, a finite, serialized, emotionally darker show that trusts a child to remember, to grieve, and to recognize love where it appears, became a thing the industry had a language for because a generation of artists had learned that language in one place. The diner scene was cut, the finale held, and the people who watched both happen went on to make the shows that carried the difference forward, one hard-won frame at a time. So this is what the show has been doing all along, underneath the mystery and the color and the summer light. It takes a season that every child understands as endless and quietly reminds you that it is not. It builds a town out of secrets, and then shows you that the deepest secret is an ordinary one, that the people you love grow up and grow apart and grow old, and that no cipher or portal or bargain can hold any of it still. The darkness was never really the demon. The darkness was the calendar. Everything Bill Cipher threatens is only a louder version of what time was going to do anyway, gently, without malice, on its own schedule. That is why the ending lands the way it does. The monsters are defeated and the danger passes, and what remains is a bus pulling away from a wooden shack, two children a little older than they were, a great uncle waving from a porch he almost lost. The whole strange summer in the end was a way of teaching you to say goodbye to something you could not keep. And so the last picture is not a battle or a triumph. It is a light left on in a house at the edge of the woods and the road leading out of the valley, and the quiet certainty that the people inside will remember this, even after the leaves turn and the town settles back into its ordinary dark. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.